Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Joe, for inviting me to speak today. It's a great honor to be here. I want to also thank Kyle Johnson, my advisor when I was a linguistics student here. Kyle was the person who informed me that Merriam-Webster was just down the road in Springfield. Thank you, Kyle, for directing me to my professional calling. I'm grateful, but I must also say that I hold you partially responsible for my immoderate book buying habit and for my weakened eyesight. I've been a lexicographer, that is a writer and editor of dictionaries, for more than 20 years now. And in that time, I have continually been struck by the disconnect between the lexicographer's conception of what a dictionary's role is and the typical dictionary user's conception of that role. Lexicographers, and I am talking specifically about English language lexicographers, and especially about ones who write general use dictionaries, lexicographers tend to see the dictionary's role as being perhaps as simple as this: to tell the truth about words. That's how Philip Gove, editor-in-chief of Merriam-Webster's 1961 unabridged dictionary, put it. For the English language lexicographer, there is no gatekeeping, no effort to keep the language contained or fixed. The aim is to tell the truth about words, based on the evidence available. Truth is a multifaceted thing, though, and certainly there's agreement between lexicographers and people who use dictionaries. A dictionary provides facts about a word's spelling, its inflections, its function, its meaning, its etymology. But we also know that sometimes people are looking for something most dictionaries are not designed to do. Perennially, one of our most looked up words is love. Lookups of love at merriam-webster.com are high generally, but they always spike around Valentine's Day. We're pretty sure that people aren't checking spelling or inflections. They're looking up love because they want to know what the band Foreigner wanted to know. They want to know what love is. That is, they want a better understanding of what the phenomenon called love is, a kind of philosophical explication. They have, in fact, told us as much. Email received May 21, 2018. You need to change the definition of love because what I feel for my girlfriend, name withheld, is far more than what the definition states. Email received October 15, 2015. As a dictionary, can you please tell me the true meaning of love? Because I'm going crazy now. Help me please, love lots. Emoticon comprising a less than symbol and 3. Sometimes they want to offer helpful corrections. Email received April 21, 2006. A new definition of love. Love, when two life forms use one another for leisure, trust, information, and/or work. Webster can add more if they wish. Thanks. My replies to queries such as these is to point the writer to poets and philosophers. They're the ones who dig into the nature of love itself. It's just not the dictionary's job. In lexicography, we talk about this as being a matter of real defining versus word defining. The investigation into the nature of phenomena, that's called real defining. I admit the terminology is imperfect. I think this means that the band Foreigner does real defining and I don't. Whatever. The term that is contrasted with real defining or real definition is itself apt. In lexicography, our interest is in the word itself. And so we call what we do word defining, or word definition. Within the category of word definition, there are two varieties. The first is called stipulative definition. This is the kind of defining that aims to reflect cold facts about words that have precise and largely static functions in the language. It doesn't matter what the layperson thinks angina pectoris is. The definer who handles medical terms will define it according to what the medical literature says it is. At Merriam-Webster, definers are categorized as either science definers or general definers. Science definers handle vocabulary relating to math, chemistry, astronomy, medicine, biology, etc., and they do primarily stipulative defining. A general definer, which is what I am, handles any non-science terms, and must also do plenty of stipulative defining. At love, for example, the tennis use of the word gets a stipulative definition, a score of 0, as in tennis. The parenthetical makes the definition broad enough to cover the use of love in scoring in other games. But the bulk of the entry requires what we call lexical defining, the writing of definitions that reflect actual usage. While the entry for love is a big fail, according to some of our correspondents, it does, in fact, reflect the varied ways that speakers of English use the word love. Love can refer to many things. It can be strong affection with or without sexual desire. It can be a sexual episode or sex itself. It can be benevolent concern for the good of others. It can be adoration of God. It can be great enthusiasm. It can be appreciative attention or praise. And it can be a score of 0, among other things. Lexical definitions require that the definer read a great many examples of words in use. For a term like love, one has to be sure that the resulting definition addresses current and historical uses of the word, religious and literary uses, formal and informal uses, which means consulting hundreds of sources. I'll get into how this is done a bit later on, but for now, we're going to move on from real versus word defining, because the disconnect between how the lexicographer sees the dictionary's role and what dictionary users often want a dictionary to do doesn't stop there. In addition to wanting a dictionary to do the poet's job, people who use dictionaries also frequently want dictionaries to pass judgment on the language's constituents. There's an anecdote involving Samuel Johnson, creator of the first full dictionary of the English language, published in 1755. The oldest version of the anecdote has an unnamed woman approaching Dr. Johnson and complimenting him on his prudent omission of improper words, to which Johnson is said to have replied, "No, madam, I have not daubed my fingers. I find, however, that you have been looking for them." Johnson did, in fact, daub his fingers with the ink required to define improper words. He defined fart, prohibited in my childhood home, as wind from behind. And he defined bitch, a name of reproach for a woman, in addition to its female canid meaning. He also included the potent sobriquet pricklouse, a contemptuous term for a tailor. But what Johnson found still holds true. Sometimes people look up words they don't want to find. And when they find the word or the meaning that they don't want to find, they sometimes let us know just how dissatisfied they are with us. Email received March 2, 2016. I know you've heard it before, but as a lifelong educator, I simply feel that you and other dictionary entities are absolutely wrong by allowing slang, non-words, misused words, such as ain't and irregardless, to become words or even entries in the dictionary. Why have rules if they aren't applied? I already know the answer, just voicing a view and casting my vote. Thanks. Irregardless. It's not a word, people say. But from a lexicographer's perspective, it is indeed a word. It's a combination of sounds that communicates a meaning. There's evidence of it in use as far back as 1795, though it was not common in American dialectal speech until the early 20th century. It's likely a blending of irrespective and regardless, and it is primarily used in informal speech. Irregardless was one of our 2020 words of the year. The words are chosen based on what people look up at Merriam-Webster.com. Lookups for it increased dramatically in July, up 464%, when actor Jamie Lee Curtis tweeted that we had just entered the word. Ms. Curtis was wrong. We first entered irregardless in one of our dictionaries in 1934, and it's been present at Merriam-Webster.com since that website debuted in 1996. What people are really saying when they say that irregardless isn't a word is that it isn't a respectable word that people should use. And here is where we see another pair of terms, prescriptive and descriptive. Many dictionary users want and expect a dictionary to be prescriptive, to tell them what words they should and shouldn't use, to tell them what's good English and what's not. All of the major English language dictionaries are, however, not prescriptive, but descriptive. They are designed to describe the language as it is used. They provide guidance about controversial words. Our entry for irregardless recommends that you use regardless instead, so that your listener is not distracted by your word choice. But dictionaries are dedicated to collecting all the established words of the language in all their messy variation. As Sidney Landau writes in Dictionaries, the Art and Craft of Lexicography, all dictionaries based on usage, and all competently done dictionaries must be based on usage, are descriptive. Prescription is impossible to distinguish from bias. Any preferred usage or condemnation of existing usage necessarily reflects the educational or cultural background of the editor making such a judgment. And a dictionary is no place for reflections of editors' backgrounds. A dictionary must reflect broad usage to have any legitimacy. The commitment to descriptive lexicography extends to pronunciations. And so it is that Steve Wilhite, the person credited with creating what is referred to in writing with the letters G-I-F, can report that it is correctly pronounced GIF, while the dictionary provides both GIF and GIF as established pronunciations at its entry. Coining a word does not grant a person any special privileges with regard to a dictionary's treatment of a word. We're really only interested in what the speakers of the language have done with it. These facts about dictionaries, they're about words, not concepts. They reflect actual usage, not ideal usage. These facts do not mean that a dictionary cannot rightly function to settle arguments and justify claims. In truth, it is exactly because of these facts that a dictionary can refute mistakes and misunderstandings. But those using a dictionary for such would be wise to acquaint themselves with the text's stated aims before they use it for such. It's a tough ask, though. Most people avoid articles and discussions that deal with the precepts of dictionary making, and no one wants to read the front matter of a print dictionary. The chore is unavoidable for some of us. Merriam-Webster editors begin their lexicographical careers reading the front matter. It's a task you're assigned on the first day. And it's there that you learn such information as the structure of a dictionary entry, the order of entries, alphabetical is only the beginning, the function of the divisions in headwords, they designate not syllables, but where printers typically allow a hyphen, and the basics of defining itself. The noun side-eye dates at least as far back as 1797. The verb appears to be a 20th century innovation, but it wasn't until 2016 that it met our criteria for entry: sustained, meaningful use in a variety of sources over an extended period of time. As the definer handling the term, I considered 29 examples in our files, including the following. A 2016 example from Time magazine. Though there's humor in the unexpected pairing, the actors play it with the innocence of children who do not yet count the judging side eye as part of their vocabularies. A 2009 quote in the Sunday Mail from Carmen van Kerkhove. People have given him the side eye for a while. A 2011 movie review in the Detroit Free Press referring to some mysterious third guy who keeps giving him the side eye and chasing him around Manhattan. A 1967 uncredited quote from the Seattle Daily Times. He side-eyed me to see if he had chosen the right approach. An inverse headline from 2016, with Zika virus headed north, American scientists side-eye Asian tiger mosquitoes. A 2016 use in Essence magazine. I naturally and perpetually side-eye every woman who can rock a pointed toe shoe with ease. And from exactly a century before that, a 1916 example from the Arizona Republican. In his mind's eye, he saw himself associating with actor folk who invariably side-eye him and whisper among themselves, "That's Alonzo Gubbins, frightfully wealthy." The 29 examples in our files do indeed show that side-eye had met our criteria for entry: sustained, meaningful use in a variety of sources over an extended period of time. The term's function is clear in the examples. It's found in both quoted speech and prose writing, in newspapers and magazines with wide readership. There are examples from the US and Canada, from the UK, and from Australia and New Zealand, and evidence going back a century, with the bulk of evidence from recent years. Prior to the late 20th century, Merriam-Webster definers would have had to make do with only this kind of evidence, with what was in our files. These files, which we call the Citation Files, are examples collected by Merriam-Webster editors beginning in the late 19th century and now containing about 100 million indexed words in about 16 million individual citations. Each citation is an excerpt from text that shows a highlighted word in context and that has been chosen by an editor because of its possible use in defining. Anything can be a source. Citations come from comic strips, menus, gas station signs, novels, newspapers, magazines, academic journals, blogs, anything. Editors are supposed to spend time each workday collecting this evidence, and most of us find that we can't help collecting it on non-work days, too. The Merriam-Webster definers of this century have significantly more resources, though. In addition to the citations in our files, I was also able to search for examples of side-eye in various electronic databases and corpora that Merriam-Webster licenses and subscribes to. Nexus showed the term to be gaining in use from the early years of the current century, with significant use beginning gradually and increasing more dramatically from 2010 on. Various corpora at markdavies.englishcorpora.org offered still more evidence. Google Books had examples too. If I were to consider the term today, I would also have the surfeit of corpora that we now have access to through Sketch Engine, our newest lexicographical tool. The quantity of evidence can be overwhelming, and knowing how to sort and weigh it is very important. As I mentioned a moment ago, examples from menus and signage have been part of our evidence for a long time. We continue to pay attention to formal and informal use, to written and spoken use. We collect examples from Twitter and Reddit, in addition to examples from the Times of London, New York, LA, Chicago Sun, Tampa Bay. But as has been the case for our entire history, we aim to define the established words of the language as reflected especially in published, edited text. We know full well that this means there are terms covered extensively in Urban Dictionary that we will never define. It is not our assertion that these are not words. Of course they are words, at least most of them are. But when a word regularly appears in a variety of published edited texts over a period of time, it has demonstrated a likely longevity, and that's the kind of word we define. Our defining criteria, sustained, meaningful use in a variety of sources from over an extended period of time, are intentionally vague. Fardell passes the test of sustained use mainly by appearing in Hamlet's soliloquy. Yeat has had a hard time with the meaningful piece until quite recently. It's still in the not yet pile. The name of a new element gets an enormous boost with entry in a single source, the scientific journal Pure and Applied Chemistry. And sometimes an extended period of time is almost no time at all. COVID-19 was entered in our dictionary a mere 34 days after its coinage. The criteria for entry is the same for intraocular pressure as it is for beer goggles, but the lexicographer has to hold each term up to those criteria one at a time. Side-eye met the entry criteria in a more typical way than any of those terms I just mentioned, and it was entered with the definition reading, a sidelong glance or gaze, especially when expressing scorn, suspicion, disapproval, or veiled curiosity. The entry also provides two examples, the second prefaced by the note often used with the and demonstrating that use. The head word is hyphenated, side-I, and the entry includes the hyphenless open variant, side-I, identifying it as less common than the hyphenated form. The most tedious part of creating an entry like this is tabulating the evidence to provide accurate information about these variant forms. I was relieved that the closed form, S-I-D-E-E-Y-E, was not in the running. The verb is not defined at all, but is covered as what we refer to as an undefined run-on. It's styled with a hyphen only and identified as both transitive and intransitive. Its forms are given, and an example is included. The meaning of the verb is considered to be easily enough understood from the definition of the noun. The entry has a pronunciation and a date of first known use of 1797. The example justifying that date is not included, but I'm going to read it to you just for fun. It's from a text called Remembrancer for Lord's Day Evenings, dated 19 March 1797. The text reads, "Here we come to what calls for the strongest eyesight, the most steadfast gazing. Our being in Adam," the writer by this means something like a deep kinship with Adam, "our being in Adam has been looked on with a side eye. The subject has provoked dislike, I may almost say contempt. It is now painful to speak of it." I want to look now for a minute at the definition itself. It is the most common of the four basic types of definitions, what we call an analytical definition. An analytical definition begins by putting the word being defined, the definiendum, into the most limiting category that will include it. That category is referred to as the definition's genus term. In the case of side-eye, the genus term is the phrase glance or gaze. That's what the definition hangs on. A side-eye is a kind of glance or gaze. To the genus term are added differentii that distinguish the definiendum from other members of that genus. In this case, differentii are sidelong, a sidelong glance or gaze, and then the specifying phrase, especially when expressing scorn, suspicion, disapproval, or veiled curiosity. If a verb had been considered to warrant its own definition, it would likely have received a definition of a second type, the much despised truncated analytical definition: to look at someone or something with a side eye. Its definition includes the head word, or actually a homograph of the head word, in its text. Truncated analytical definitions are incredibly useful when you must keep a physical book portable and affordable. They allow the definer to take advantage of the reader's access to an entry that is mere millimeters from where their eyes already rest. Truncated analytical definitions continue to be useful to the definer of an electronic dictionary, as they save effort there too. Such definitions are key to efficiency, as they permit the dictionary to say a good many things just the one time. But especially in an electronic dictionary, these kinds of definitions are understandably maddening. Look up sagacity, and you find the truncated analytical definition, the quality of being sagacious, which means that you have to actually click on a hyperlink, horrors, to learn the meaning of the word. But the truncated analytical definition allows the dictionary to avoid repeating everything at the entry for sagacious. A third type of definition is the periphrastic definition. Sometimes no genus term is to be found, and a definer has to orient the reader by describing the semantic job that the genus term would otherwise do. Definienda requiring periphrastic definitions are often simple terms, ones that make good genus terms themselves. Ability has among its definitions competence in doing something. Form has the shape and structure of something as distinguished from its material. Hot is having a relatively high temperature. Off is from a place or position. A fourth type of definition is the definition by synonym. We typically use these for the less common word for a thing. Whataboutism gets a full definition: the act or practice of responding to an accusation of wrongdoing by claiming that an offense committed by another is similar or worse. Also, the response itself. The British synonym, whataboutery, is defined with only a link to whataboutism. A synonymous cross-reference, we call it. But like whataboutism, it too gets 3 examples of the word in use at its entry. There are 2 other common defining methods. They don't strictly qualify as definitions, but are more correctly understood as substitutes for definitions. Neither is preceded by the boldface colon that introduces a definition in Merriam-Webster's dictionaries. That boldface colon can be understood to mean is here defined as, so that the word is sidelong is here defined as side eye is here defined as a sidelong glance or gaze. The first non-definitional defining method is the functional description by usage note. That is used for such lexical items as trademarks. The only dictionary treatment Kleenex gets is an entry with the functional label trademark and the description used for a cleansing tissue. Functional description by usage note is also used for interjections. Holy moly gets the description used to express surprise, amazement, or bewilderment. And it's common for function words. Sense 1a of the preposition for is described with used as a function word to indicate purpose. The final common defining method is the expansion, which is simply the full words that are the source of an abbreviation or symbol. TBH has abbreviation as its functional label. It gets an informal register label and 3 examples. And without even a dash, just the words to be honest, where a definition would go. At the time that I defined side-eye, my defining assignment was to look through a very long list of words that editors have over the years identified as being worth considering for entry, and choosing the ones I thought most important to assess. A definer's job varies, though. We commonly work through alphabetical sections of the dictionary, particularly when we are working on a new edition of a dictionary, or we have assignments related to groups of entries. My assignment when I revised love, noun and verb, was to fully revise the definitions of words most commonly looked up. That assignment, to revise entries for words commonly looked up, wasn't possible before 1996, when the entire Merriam-Webster Collegiate Dictionary 10th edition was put online for free. Up to that point, there was no way for lexicographers to know which of their definitions was being consulted how often. But as the information superhighway started to get real traffic, we started to get real information about where everyone was going. In addition to love, there are some other perennial favorites at Merriam-Webster.com, and they will surprise no one. Right up there at the top, affect and effect. Also the pair IE and EG. And then a bunch of common terms with abstract meanings: culture, integrity, pragmatic, ubiquitous, disposition. It's clear that people are often looking for clarification about a word they encounter pretty regularly and probably use themselves. Of course, the dirty words and swear words are in there too, so also words people encounter regularly and likely use themselves, but perhaps clarification is a lesser motive. We let this information guide our work. Entries for commonly looked up words get mostly full analytical definitions and lots of examples. Many of them also have paragraphs that discuss usage issues in depth. People, of course, also look up words that we don't yet define, and we can make note of those words and monitor their development. We don't aim to be at the vanguard of neology or slang, as our criteria make clear, but these failed lookups, as we call them, are useful nonetheless. In addition to the various articles on usage and punctuation at Merriam-Webster.com, we have a regular feature called Words We're Watching. Fleek was addressed there years before the term met our entry criteria. The internet as source of information, backing for our research into the meanings of words, and illumination of what dictionary users look for, is just one piece of what the internet has offered lexicography, though. Arguably far more significant in the daily practice of lexicography is the shift from print to an electronic platform. The most challenging defining stricture, the need to keep entries as concise as possible to keep a book portable and affordable, is gone. We can now include whatever and as much information as we think will be useful to the reader. The entries for gender and sex, for example, now include a lengthy note explaining the historical and current uses of both. The note addresses their earliest synonymous use, when gender expanded from its grammatical use to join sex in referring to either of the two primary biological forms of a species, and then the senses that they each acquired in the 20th century, the sexual intercourse meaning of sex, now its most common meaning, and genders used to refer to the behavioral, cultural, or psychological traits typically associated with one sex, as in gender roles. and later, gender's use in the compound terms gender identity and gender expression, and its eventual use as a synonym of gender identity. The note also addresses the prescribed distinctions between the words sex for biological forms, gender for psychological and sociocultural traits, and the fact that the prescribed distinctions tend to be observed in technical and medical contexts, but are frequently not observed in journalistic and general use. This kind of information offers the reader perspective and nuance that formerly was impossible for us to provide. Such information is also a response to the other side of the dictionary internet coin. Not only does the internet provide us with information about how words are used and what words people look for, but it also makes it possible for dictionary users to actively engage with lexicographers and with the dictionary itself. That usage note on gender and sex is in some ways a reply to queries and complaints and proclamations about our definitions for the terms. It was clear from what we were hearing from dictionary users that a note like that was needed if clarity of the term's meanings and functions is what we were offering. We've always received correspondence from dictionary users. I read you some emails earlier, but we receive letters too. In the basement of the Merriam-Webster building in Springfield, there is a tall and narrow room called the Vault. It's about 4 feet wide, 15 feet deep, and has about a 15-foot ceiling. It's full of file drawers, many of them containing letters from correspondents. We throw away nothing. But Merriam-Webster is no longer a silent logo with a post office box and email address. We tweet and people tweet back. We announce that we've entered new words and people take to social media to applaud or excoriate. Anonymity used to be guaranteed the lexicographer. Our recently retired director of defining, Steve Peralt, had a hand in many thousands of definitions consulted by millions of dictionary users daily, and he oversaw major changes to our practices, but his name is unknown by non-lexicographers, which doesn't actually bother him one whit. But anonymity for the lexicographer can no longer be taken for granted. Nowadays, you might find yourself on a podcast or get drafted to appear in videos that go on a website where commenters will voice opinions on your hair or on your evolving choice of eyewear. The interactions between the public and the dictionary don't always go smoothly. It's not infrequently that we're accused of using our word of the day to throw shade at someone or as a comment on some current news item. In truth, it's all coincidence. That daily vocabulary feature is prepared weeks in advance and very much aims to avoid controversy. Our Twitter feed does not have the same excuse, but coincidence also sometimes gets mistaken for a jab there. We've learned some important lessons from these interactions over the years. Merriam-Webster first declared a word of the year in 2003. It was democracy. The American Dialect Society started the whole word of the year thing in 1990 with the word bush lips, a comment on the president at the time. In 2003, the members of the society chose metrosexual. That 2003 word choice, democracy, was based on lookups at merriam-webster.com. But in 2006, Web 2.0 was all the rage. Dictionary readers were dictionary users, and user participation was key. We opened the Word of the Year selection to users, and they chose Stephen Colbert's coinage, truthiness. We did the same thing in 2007, and users chose woot, W00T. Neither of these was a word we even defined at the time. In 2008, Merriam-Webster went back to its traditional data-driven Word of the Year procedures, and a lucky editor narrowly escaped having to write a press release about Wordy McWordface. We'll be announcing our 2021 Word of the Year soon. 2020's word was pandemic. And the selection will say something about what people ask of a dictionary and about what a dictionary offers. Merriam-Webster's dictionaries still make the same bold offer they've made for a long time now, to tell the truth about words. The changed relationship between the dictionary and the dictionary user that the internet has wrought means that truth is closer to a real catalog of the language than it ever has been before. It used to be that the lexicographer's evidence was mainly what had been permitted a platform, and a platform that came at a significant price. A price reflected in a newspaper's distribution, a magazine's subscription rate, a publisher's bestsellers list. But the internet so dramatically lowers that price and so dramatically democratizes the dissemination of the written word, and even the published edited written word, that dictionaries can now see the language as many more of its speakers actually use it. The change is subtle and significant, and the result is a dictionary that's truer, I think, than it's ever been before. I'm happy to. Thank you.
So you're willing to take some questions?
Absolutely.
Great.
Yes?
I'm really curious as to how exactly you decide what part of speech a word is.
We're pretty good at figuring out a word's part of speech. It's part of the defining training, for sure. That takes place over, gosh, now so long ago since I've done it. It's many weeks of training that you get. Adverbs are the trickiest. They're also a convenient bucket that you can throw questionable items into. The difference between adjectives and conjunctions can be especially tricky. But we talk a lot about function. Part of speech is always determined by function. So that a part of speech, or a word like because, can go from being only a conjunction to more recently also being a preposition. So just by analyzing the usage, we determine the function. Yes? Well, a lot of editors work from home now, and actually since March of 2020, most people have worked only from home. But under normal circumstances, non-pandemic times, a lot of people work in the office some days and work at home other days. The editors all work on the second floor of this pretty nondescript brick building that looks like it could be a school administration building. It's on a quiet street in Springfield. And the second floor of the building is very, very quiet. You're not really allowed to talk. When I first was hired, if you wanted to communicate with an editor, you would write a note on a 3x5 slip of paper and put it in your outbox, and it would be delivered by one of the two people who would walk around twice a day delivering these notes and taking care of other matters. We now email each other, but it's very quiet, and it's quiet really because you don't want to interrupt somebody when they're deep in a defining task. It can really throw you off. If you've almost nailed it and somebody walks up to your cubicle, it's difficult. As I said, you're supposed to spend about an hour a day of looking for new words. That doesn't always happen. And editors have other tasks. People work on the Word of the Day feature. People write articles for the Merriam-Webster.com website. People edit press releases, help write press releases, and work on other production matters also. Yes?
I'm really curious about this definition of a variety of sources and how that a new element might only need to appear. And so I'm curious, sort of, with the internet, do you think that will ever change? Will become like more quickly responsive to fastly entering words of the lexicon, informal words.
Well, it's true that we do ask more of informal words. The chemical element is a really special case. I'm glad you're letting me clarify that, because it actually, it's almost like the entering of an element's name in this particular journal is a performative act, because that is how, that's, and everybody knows, it's like that is how it actually becomes official, that it even has that name. Most of the time, we're looking, both technical and informal words can take a long time. What we really want is to get a sense that the word is going to be familiar to some significant number of speakers of the language, that people are going to be coming across it. But technical vocabulary can also be limited to a particular sphere and still qualify for entry. It's pretty subjective. We have, over the years, entered informal terms much more quickly. I actually have I did some research on this not too long ago. It was very, very interesting. It's not something that we typically, it's not something that it's not research that we typically keep compiled and easy to get to, but I looked at terms that are either labeled as informal or slang, and I looked at when they were entered in our dictionaries and when the first known use of the word was. Now, sometimes that first known use gets blown out of the water by some amazing evidence, like that 1797 example of side-eye. I know that, frenemy had a date of 1951, and then all of a sudden we found a date of frenemy in use from 1898. But for the most part, we have a sense of how old a word is pretty early on in the process, and certainly by the time it gets an entry. We have a dating specialist on staff who puts that date in. But in the 1950s, it took an average of 35 years for a word to be entered in our dictionaries, an informal word. It was about 35 years. And now, in the first decade of this century, it's about 11 years. So we are definitely entering informal language more quickly than we used to. And that's because there is just so much more informal language out there. We have access to lots and lots of informal language. And even in publications that used to have more formal language, the language is definitely less formal in those sorts of publications than it used to be. Yes?
First of all, thank you very much. Incredibly interesting.
Thank you.
I'm also very glad that you brought up gender and sexuality. I spent quite a while myself arguing and thinking about the use of various coinage, I should say, in various words, sexual identity. And I'm wondering now that the use of how it plans to tackle the continually expanding at an exponential rate base of words related to gender.
It is a very rich source of new vocabulary, and we've been following it closely for a bunch of years now. So I think we have, as you say, there are new terms being coined pretty frequently, but it's a part of the vocabulary of the language that we are paying very careful attention to, and we aim to just keep abreast of what is fully established. So the criteria are the same. We need to see that the use, a new use of a word or a new word has a wide enough use that lots of people who encounter it are familiar with it. Yes?
Do you have a process for
I'm not really allowed to single-handedly remove them, but I have recommended them for deletion. It's really kind of hard for a dictionary, for a definition for a word to fall out of a dictionary. In an electronic dictionary, we don't need to take anything out. We do take things out if they are no longer necessary. We're not so concerned about space. It used to be that when you were going from, say, a 10th collegiate to an 11th collegiate dictionary, you needed to add hundreds, maybe even thousands of words to this dictionary, and there was no space for it. You cannot make it bigger, you can't make the margins smaller. And even in those cases, we aim to remove as little as possible. It's always preferable to, say, cut an example shorter or to remove an example. We have certainly removed terms, though. I know that our unabridged dictionary used to include an entry for color film. No more. Doesn't include an entry for color photography either, because the entry for photography now and the entry for color now addresses that fully enough. Most of the time, the words that come out of a dictionary are words that no one is going to notice them going missing. Oh, here's another one that fell out. Full cream cheese. We still include an entry for full cream, and it includes full cream cheese as an example. Full cream is labeled British, and it's defined as containing cream, not skim or made from skim milk. So no more full cream cheese, but you can still figure out what it means from the dictionary. Yes?
What does it take for a word to be described as vulgar in the dictionary?
We have to have evidence of people being offended by it, and of its. I mean, it's definitely has to do with editorial judgment. You've got to decide, is this word intended to cause offense? And that's what you can get a sense of it from the context sometimes. And as always, there are going to be some examples that provide useful information and others that don't. So no word is slang in every single context. But you look at what its most common functions are. What's the register that it typically has? Yes?
It may be a bit long, I apologize. Are you familiar with cultures that have language academies?
A little.
I mean, I don't know much about the French Language Academy, but I'm an Israeli and I was educated here as a linguist. And lately I started with phonology and morphology, and lately I found myself doing more and more lexicography. And see, the thing is, this is really very, very difficult for me to even talk about, because there's a Hebrew Language Academy, and there's too many facets. Some of them really good and useful, and some of them are terrible. Maybe I'll start with a terrible. The terrible thing is that everything is determined by vote.
Oh.
The Language Academy decides by vote, of experts, supposedly. This is one thing. The other thing is that because of the particular situation in a country like Israel, which needed whatever encouragement it could give to the national aspirations of the people and to the birth of a new state, they really felt that they had to truly innovate the language, which was for 1700 years was not spoken. So what did they do? When the Enlightenment period in Hebrew literature started, they decided we admire the heroes of the biblical times and whatever, so it's going to be just biblical Hebrew. But the Bible is a very limited corpus, maybe 8,000, 9,000 items or something like that. So it's too poor, and they were reasonably successful, but it was not enough. Then, in the second half of the 19th century, when what we call the revival of Hebrew literature started, somebody came up with a clever idea, one Mendeley, the bookseller supposedly, and he said, look, everything that was written historically, is a legitimate source, and this will be the base for the revival of the language, okay, regardless. And it's interesting that he even included medieval Hebrew, where Hebrew was not spoken at all. As long as it's written, that's mekudash, that's sacred or something, And the problem is that they get into this mania of you cannot really create anything unless there's a precedent historically for it. Then you need to create new words. Okay? So I'll give you a good example. I mean, some of the things have precedents in the Bible or Mishnaic Hebrew, where the language was vibrant and all kinds of new patterns were formed. But it's interesting that, for example, they decided, based on mostly European language, I guess, that in order to make a new word as transparent as possible, the best thing is to have a suffix that is clearly marked as such and would have a certain particular meaning. So they decided they would need a suffix for, let's say, I'm taking just one example, a suffix for diminutives, okay? So they decided that they would pick up the ending, the suffix on. Now, on has a few meanings, but they looked in the sources to find out if there's any diminutive meaning to the suffix on. So they had 3 examples, 2 very doubtful, one is also strange. See, the idea was that the pupil of the eye, if you really look at somebody's eye, you will see a small person. And ish is a person, or a man, and Ishon would be a small man. Another one is Sahar, which is the moon. So Saharon is the crescent, so it's a small moon. Two examples, basically. The third one is so ridiculous I wouldn't even mention it. So they invented a new pattern, and it was successful, I have to admit. It's unbelievably productive. You take a flower pot, I want to say a small flower pot, take atzitz, so it's atzitzon, you know. Shulchan, table, shulchanon. That's easy, you know. And of course, Hebrew is not as poor as that because it has all this continuous word formation patterns. So you can do other things as well. But what I'm saying is that they really reinvented the language. And what's the problem? The problem is that the people are, either the people are stupid or the academics are stupid, I don't know. I was elected to a member of the academy, so maybe I shouldn't say that. But anyway, seriously, these people go to the academy, you know, to ask for advice. How do we say this? How do we say what's really? And the academy decides by vote, basically, you know, which is really ridiculous. Instead of looking like in all civilized world, you know, conducting, you know, thorough searches through the huge language corpora and finding out, as you say, what the frequency is and how many words continue to exist and how many words are obsolete and stuff like that, they just determine criteria. And sometimes, by the way, sometimes they're not so bad. For example, you know, katil and ktil.
I can say that early monolingual English dictionaries, like in the 17th century, it was perhaps even worse because it wasn't done by a vote. It was just one person who was making a unilateral decision, taking some Latin word and throwing an ending on it and putting it in a dictionary that then people would buy and think that they should know. So, yes?
I just wondered if you had a philosophy or an approach. Or another one is students, you have ANT and ENT.
Right. Yeah, the lexicographer doesn't have to answer those questions. The lexicographer just has to take note of what has been done. I know that there's often a historical reason, right? It's because of the French affix that existed, or you know, but I don't. Yeah, I only have to look at what is happening right now. I do sometimes research and write articles on the on Merriam-Webster.com that talk about these kinds of things. And my colleague, Peter Sokolowski, is here. Peter, can you just raise your hand? And Peter is both an English language and a French language lexicographer, and he has done significant research into the ANT, ENT, and some other suffix pairs, so maybe you two can talk later. I loved your class when I was here, by the way. I remember you, Professor Roper. So thank you for coming. Yes?
I am curious how both the internet and the increasing internationalization of English is changing questions that the collegiate
We still focus primarily on American English, really just because we don't have the resources to go that much more broadly. We're still looking at what is established primarily in American English. But that's, you know, we're doing our best, but we have to contain things a little. But yes, English, I mean, you know, the impact of all these other Englishes on American English is significant. Yes?
Is Merriam-Webster the authority for Scrabble?
Yes.
So how do you decide what goes in, what's allowable, basically?
I have never actually worked on our Scrabble dictionary. I know that it's got between 2 and 7 letters. Is that right, Peter? 2 and 7 letters.
The book is now 9.
Oh, it goes up to 9 because that's what you can do with those little tiles. Yeah, and it has to be words that are in a major dictionary, a major college level published dictionary. So we include words that we don't necessarily enter in our own dictionaries in that dictionary. Yes?
I guess this is tying into the previous question about
It is really complicated. I mean, what I'm primarily looking at is what appears in publications that have a wide readership, and so and a wide readership primarily in the United States. So it's often foods from other names of foods from other Englishes are the words that meet our criteria and then get entered. I mean, I think I'm not sure. Did I answer your question?
yeah, I already have it. I expected the answer.
Yes.
So I've always been curious about how you decided what the order of the definitions were. Does it change as, you know how they say context? But does it
Homographs, so the two different contexts, the noun and the verb, and the sense numbers at entries used to be strictly historical. And then subsenses, so 1, 2, 3, but 1A and 1B might have come after sense 2, but they were closely semantically related to sense 1. But it used to be very strictly historical because that was kind of the only way that seemed like a reasonable, reliable method to follow. But we now, our defining instructions now are to order them in whatever way makes sense. And we do, I know, all kinds of freedom, it's been wild. But we do include at each entry a date of first known use, and that specifies which sense is the first sense. Yes?
I'm sure you get this question a lot, and I'm not sure exactly how much it is your ballpark, but I was curious because it's like one of the most hot button linguistic issues today, what the process was of adding singular they.
The internal debates at Merriam-Webster are all written debates. We don't really have conversations with each other. So, but there, no, I mean, it was one that we were watching for a long time. And I think I thought it qualified for entry before our director of defining thought it qualified for entry. But eventually there was, it was all about collecting the evidence. So, how jarring is this to the majority of people is a question to answer. Are they seeing it enough that it seems like that it is just oh yes, this is how this is used, and the evidence was very clearly that it was yes, anybody who's doing any kind of reading is coming across this, and so it absolutely qualified for entry. But it was something that we were watching for a long time. I mean, I think the earliest example that I have seen of the specifically non-binary they was from the early 1980s. But there's a linguist named Dennis Barron who has written a fantastic book called What's Your Pronoun? And he delves into the history of that. It's a great book.
Maybe just one more question, and then we'll
Okay.
have a reception upstairs with the other questions.
Yes?
Thank you so much. We spoke a lot about the benefits of moving towards electronic and internet-based dictionaries. I was wondering if you feel that there are any risks or downsides.
I don't see the need to, I mean, as far as writing them, no, there's no real downside in the writing of a dictionary to just move to fully electronic. It's very, very convenient, but I never want to be separated from my print dictionaries. It's just too pleasurable.
Great.
All right.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for coming.
you.